Hey guys, today we're going to talk about what is common between all programming languages. What are some of the concepts or fundamental theories that applies to every programming language no matter which technology that you're working with. I had this idea initially to make a video on this topic because I think even I personally experienced it, and I think as programmers we sometimes shy away from learning a new technology or getting our hands into a new project that requires using a programming language that maybe we have never used before. And usually we think that I have spent so much time to master this one language that I use. That could be anything. Maybe you work extensively in JavaScript, maybe you work in C or PHP, but inevitably sometimes we come across projects or tasks which require us to go outside our comfort zone, learn a new language and implement some requirements for a project. But then we have a tendency to shy away from that, because we will have to go through all of that over again and learn completely a new language, and that just seems like a pretty daunting task, to be honest. But that is actually a very wrong way to even think about a project or a programming language, because unlike what you might think, languages share a lot of things in common, except for the syntax part. The way you'll write the language, the words, the syntax or the jargon, that will almost in all the cases be completely different from one language to other. But what will be the same is what you are trying to achieve, the goal that you're trying to achieve. I think this is also an important distinction between a senior programmer and a junior programmer. Unlike what you might think, a senior programmer is not expected to know all the languages on this planet, or even 5 or 10 different languages right at the top of his head. I mean, as a senior developer, you are not supposed to just sit down, some mystic man that just sits down in front of a computer and writes code that just runs at the first go. Instead, a senior developer knows what needs to be done. He or she might not know at the top of their head on how to actually implement it in the code, what is the syntax going to be, but they know what the goal is, so they can explain the goal to even a layman, even to someone who doesn't understand programming at all. I mean, they probably will not understand the goal, but he can explain the goal in simple English in what we call pseudo code. A developer will have to implement that goal in the specific language that the project is on. So that being said, let's get into our first point here. Something that every programming language that we work with these days, like Java and C and C# and JavaScript and Ruby on Rails or Go, have in common is abstraction. So what is abstraction? You can think of abstraction as preserving information that is relevant to a given context and removing or hiding the information that is irrelevant. Before you even write the first line of your code, there has been a lot of implementation to make that possible. Think about the IDE, think about the operating system, think about the computer itself, think about the hardware. All of those things have been put together so that you can just go to your console, go to your program, go to your IDE, just write print hello world in Python, and you get a result. So think about the process of making a cake. Often when we are making it in our homes, we start off with a base and then we can apply the creams and whatever else decoration we want on top of the cake. In doing that, we are abstracting away the complexity of actually making that base, like the sugar and flour, the quantities, the ingredients to make the base first. So we take the base and then we apply whatever flavor we want on top of it. That is kind of what we mean when we talk about abstraction. So every programming language, regardless of what task you are trying to perform, will abstract away a lot of complexity behind how it is being implemented. Instead, you as a programmer is supposed to focus on the task that you are trying to achieve and the steps that you need to take in order to achieve that task. That being said, it is essential that you make an effort to understand the complexity behind the scenes. Not while you are coding a project, not while you are building something that requires you to focus on how to get that job done, but when you are not working on a project in your own free time, it is important that you understand the complexity. Nobody can understand everything, but you must make an effort to at least understand how even a simple if-else statement works. So you should get into how logic gates work, or how the hardware implements a code. That will most definitely make you a better programmer, help you reason about some of the issues that you might be facing in your project. Next up on the list is control structures. So if you think about it, today's computers can execute billions of lines of code per second. And that kind of power gives them a fantastic potential as tools. But it cannot be useful until and unless you can control the flow of instructions that needs to be executed, the order of instructions that needs to be executed. And that is what control structures give us with the help of programming languages. So when I say control structures, think of for loops, if-else statements, while loops. So these are ways of looping or controlling the flow of instruction, the flow of instructions to the CPU, and by giving certain conditions that needs to be met. So we can jump from one block of code to the other depending on which condition is met. We can loop over a certain block of code until a certain condition is met. And that is, again, very common across all programming languages. The way of implementation, the syntax, will probably differ from one language to other, but the idea of simplifying so that we don't need to write the same instructions repeatedly exists in all programming languages across the board. This concept is very similar to even human languages. We have so many different languages, but when you need to ask for a glass of water, no matter which language you use, what you need, the goal, the essence of what you're saying, the meaning remains the same, but you will be using very different words depending on which language you choose to use to ask for that glass of water. So that is exactly what we mean when we talk about what are some of the things that are common between programming languages, because what you are trying to achieve remains the same, but the syntax, the words might change depending on which environment or which programming language that you are using. So it is essential to understand what you are trying to achieve instead of just memorizing all the syntax of a particular programming language. While that is impressive, if you can just sit down and write bug-free code in a particular language, and you don't need to just look up for silly things that we do as programmers on the internet, and you just know all these language specific syntax of a particular language and you can just write them down. That is impressive, but that is not something that essentially means that you are a senior developer, because like I explained, a senior developer has a very clear vision of what needs to be done. All right, let's wrap it up here. I certainly did not cover all the possible similarities or common things across all programming languages, but I hope you learned something new here, and I hope it helps you in your journey of being a good programmer. See you on the next one.